So we will have a recording, which I will post on our LibGuide afterward. At about 4 o'clock today, you'll receive an email with a link to the appropriate LibGuide for where all of this information is. The recording will get up there hopefully this afternoon, but sometimes YouTube takes me a while and it might be tomorrow morning. But you'll also find these slides there. And thank you, Celia, for the question. The slides, in fact, have changed. I changed them at 1:53 this afternoon. So there's only a couple different slides in there, some different notations. You can find the new ones up on the LibGuide. What else is there? Also in the email at 4 o'clock today, you'll get a link for an evaluation. And I love to read those, not just because you really help me feel better about myself and my teaching skills, but because you guys really have good suggestions about what worked and what didn't work, and what I can provide next time when I do a webinar or offer something similar to this again in the future. So I would love to hear from you on the evaluation as well. But we are here today to talk about changes to the state annual report questions. And in addition, a lot of program stuff. So if you have already attended the complimentary webinar about counting programs and self-directed activities and using the spreadsheet to do that, there will be a lot of repetition at some point in this presentation. So be prepared. I am going to repeat myself. You will see that the slides are exactly the same as they were in that program session. You can either tune out then or check your email or listen again, and maybe some additional details will come to light as people ask additional questions along the way. That could happen, but we will be talking about programs again today in addition to that hour-long webinar. Now, if you did not attend that hour-long webinar, those have also been recorded, and that information is available on our LibGuides as well. And I've got a slide about that as we go along a little bit down the road. All right, so we will go ahead and get started. Again, this is repetition here because I'm still getting the message out to so many people about the difference between our state annual report and your reports that you're putting together for your library. So as a reminder, our state report, the annual report, that big holistic thing that you guys do for me in the summer and in the fall, is something that I sent to IMLS, the Institute of Museum and Library Services, and they combine it with data from all across the country and US territories and protectorates, and they put it into the Public Libraries Survey, which tells a story nationwide of what's happening in libraries. And because it's a nationwide survey, we all have a certain set of questions that we share. So a lot of the questions that I ask you, I have to send up to IMLS. So I can't really mess with the wording. I can't mess with the definitions because those come to us from IMLS and we're all using the same questions and same definitions. And as you might imagine, it takes a long time to change those questions and definitions. So there's now a 2 to 3 year process in terms of adding new questions. So the questions are proposed, they're sort of tested out. They are tweaked a little bit with libraries out in the field. And then each state has to vote on the addition of the new questions, and it has to have a supermajority kind of vote in favor of changing them. And then they get rolled out. And then it takes another 2 to 3 years of data collection to get really solid data in response to those questions. So it takes a long time to add and make them effective. And the asterisk there is unless there's a pandemic, in which case IMLS did add a whole bunch of yes or no questions, just trying to capture what was happening at public libraries during the COVID-19 pandemic. So some of those questions showed up last year and they're going to stick around for this year. Now, in our state annual report, each state can add their own local questions. And obviously in Connecticut, we do that. So here we collect things that are really relevant to us or that may help us in Connecticut tell our story in, again, a different level of detail than we're telling to IMLS. So that's the state annual report. It's everything, right? It's circulation, collections, programs, and finances. It's really a big set of data. Now, in contrast, your library's reports are whatever you want them to be, right? They are under your control. They tell your specific story to your funders, your stakeholders, your board, your capital F friends, your lowercase friends, everybody in town. Your own reports are up to you. And I encourage you to do at least monthly reports, right? Because you need to understand for your own library what's happening in terms of circulation, program attendance, all of the finances, all of that information is really helpful to get monthly so that when it comes to do the annual report, all you have to do is add it up for the year. But you can collect a lot more data in your own reports than you're sending to me. And particularly with regard to things like reference transactions or tech help, one-on-one assistance, all of those things you can keep in a much greater level of detail than what you send to me. And your annual report reference transactions is one question. And I know that's more than one question in terms of the workload that you guys are doing. So I do encourage you to keep your own stats, tell your own story, craft those numbers and that narrative however you want for your own funders. That's a really important thing for you guys to be able to do. So that's the difference between the big state report and your own reports. And it will influence some of the questions as we go along. So let's talk now about changes to this year's annual report and those COVID questions. Most of them are going to stick around for one more year, hopefully just one more year. We'll see again about a third year. I suspect because some of these questions will be relevant for staggered reporting years across the country that we may see them again potentially. You'll recall from last year, these are mostly yes, no. So although there are 8 or 10 of them, they are fairly quick and they aren't a substantial reporting burden for you guys. So hopefully those are easy. There are still 2 questions from IMLS that do require us to count, starting with the number of weeks your library was closed due to COVID-19. And this means that the building was closed to the public. And I don't have the actual wording of the question. Do I number of weeks during the year that due to the COVID-19 pandemic, a library building was physically closed and the public could not enter when it otherwise would have been? That's the full question there. So you'll remember it's about the building being closed to the public. So your staff were in there, obviously working, but you're going to count the number of weeks when you were not allowing the public in. And this is a little bit particular. IMLS says that your building is open if people are crossing your threshold, opening a door, coming into the foyer, the lobby, the vestibule, whatever you call that little room at the opening of your library. If people are coming into that space, say for a pickup, a quick pickup, that counts as your building being open to the public, right? Because people actually walked into your building. So you'll want to be really careful in your thinking, in your particular context of your library and your structure, which weeks your library opened the doors and let the public in, whether it's to your vestibule or farther in, and which weeks your library was physically closed to the public and they did not come in. So if you're just doing curbside pickup outside the building and the public is not coming through your doors, that means your building was closed to the public. So think about those definitions as you're counting. Also a question is the number of weeks a library had limited occupancy due to the pandemic. And limited occupancy, according to IMLS, is a number of different things, not just head count. They also say limited occupancy, limited public occupancy practices could include, obviously, occupancy counts or appointment only library use, or visitor time limits, or closed stacks or meeting rooms. So all of those qualify as limited public occupancy. And I'm going to go out on a limb and say pretty much every public library in Connecticut at some point in the reporting year had limited public occupancy because of some of those reasons. So all of these reminders are in the annual report form as sort of little pop-up messages. So you'll be able to find them there in the form as well. Okay. Let's hop on to Connecticut COVID questions. We did add some Connecticut specific questions last year, and some of them will stick around for another year because they're still relevant, including questions about if you did offer curbside pickup, give me your start and end dates. Now, this is a big open-ended question, and you can type in there whatever you want. So if you started curbside pickups in April of 2020, go ahead and put that as your start date. That's awesome. If it's still ongoing, just tell me that, right? In many cases, those curbside pickup services are still ongoing or still available. So put that in there. You might say April 2020 through ongoing. Or if you started and ended on specific dates, you can give me those as well. Up to you. And then an easy drop-down question is, if you did offer curbside pickup, was it available to residents only or to both residents and non-residents? And if you didn't offer curbside pickup at all, there is an NA option there. So that's an easy one, hopefully, for everybody. Now, 2 optional questions. So if you've been collecting numbers that you would like to report to me that I can then give back to you on advocacy flyers, you can tell me the number of transactions for curbside service or the number of patrons who used your curbside service. Totally up to you. I don't know how people have been counting them. So I tried to come up with a couple of options for what you might have been counting and how you might count it. And you can give me that data if you have it. Don't stress if you do not. Just don't worry about it, all right? Leave those blank. Totally okay. All right, I'm going to move into some clarifications on the annual report. So I put in red here that the building is open to the public. And so again, remember that IMLS definition of the building itself being open to the public. So when you're counting your public service hours for this reporting period, which is July 1 through June 30, there is going to be some tricky math involved this year, right? It's not the easy one where we just get to multiply the same number of hours per week times 52, because the schedule was really funky this year. So you may have had a few weeks when you were closed to the public completely. So those weeks would be 0. You may have had some weeks when you were open to the public for very limited hours. So you'll count what those limited hours were. Then maybe you expanded your hours, which is fabulous, and your building was open to the public for more. So you're going to count those hours. And then maybe at some point you opened up to your original pre-pandemic hours, and you'll count those as well. So this will take probably a little bit of time and some calculation this year to be able to work out those annual public service hours when your building was open to the public. So again, this means people opening your door, walking over the threshold, stepping into your buildings, into the walls, that the members of the public were coming into the building. Obviously, again, your staff were there working in the building, but you guys count as staff and not as public. So you're looking at the public service hours in response to this question. Likewise, with the number of weeks the library was open, this means the building is open to the public. So you may have been working in the building as staff. You may have been offering curbside service exterior to your building for weeks on end. But for the purposes of the annual report, those weeks were when your building was closed to the public. So make sure that you are counting only the weeks that you were open, that the building was open to the public, and then that second bullet point for at least 2 days. Celia, your question, minor variations in hours. What constitutes minor? IMLS has no definition of that. I think this means, for example, if you had to do a staff meeting and you were closed one morning for 2 or 3 hours, that would be a minor variation. So you would not include that, things like that. If your water main broke and your building was closed for 3 weeks while you repaired restrooms, that would be a major variation in your public service hours, and you would count that. So take a look at your own context. In terms of library visits, what we might call door count, you'll want to count the people who entered your library building for any purpose, right? So maybe they walked into the foyer for a curbside pickup, what you might call a lobby pickup or a vestibule pickup. Maybe they came in and repaired photocopiers. Maybe there were patrons who actually came in. You're going to be counting all the people who enter your building for any purpose, and you will exclude people who stayed outside your building, right? So if you did curbside service outside, actually at the curb, and people did not come in, they don't get counted in your door count. Likewise, if you have a drive-through window, those people did not come in your building, so you're not going to include them in your door count. And that's pretty much the same as last year. So as a reminder, interlibrary loans, just a reminder from last year, we clarified that if you are part of a consortium, you'll include your consortium holds as interlibrary loans for the purposes of the annual report. You will also include patron-placed holds if you let your patrons do that. And those, for the purposes of the annual report, count as interlibrary loans. And you will not here count any Borrow at Connecticut loans where patrons are walking into your building. They're not residents of your particular town. They reside in other towns, but they're visiting you in person to borrow things. That's a Borrow at loan. So you're not going to count them as interlibrary loans. You will also not count swaps, CLC media circuits, or things that you have borrowed from the Library Service Center. And that should be consistent from previous years. So more reminders about reference transactions. Last year, IMLS tweaked the reference definition just a little bit, getting it more in line with the Reference and User Services Association, part of ALA. So this is a little bit of a wording tweak, but fairly consistent with what we've been reporting in the past. Remember that reference transactions does not include formal instruction like a bibliographic instruction or a classroom setting where you might be teaching a technology class to a group of people. That would not count as a reference transaction. That might count as a program instead. And we have some examples, what you can count and don't count, but make sure that you are getting credit for your reader's advisory as a reference transaction. And likewise, that one-on-one tech help that everybody's been doing and doing so well and doing extensively this past year, that counts as a reference transaction. Now, some examples of things that do not count are those directional services. How do I find staff? Like, where's the restroom? Where's the 600s? Can you help me make a photocopy? Those are not a reference transaction. You can absolutely count them for your own purposes on your own stats because they did keep you busy, but for the purposes of the IMLS and our annual report for the state purposes, that's not a reference transaction. So be really careful how you're counting those. Okay, we do have some new Connecticut questions. I added a question about your library's website because I have all of your library's other contact information, but I don't have your website. And this is going to be really helpful to add to our public library directory and just making it easier for people to find your services and your hours right on your website. So hopefully that's an easy one for you. Website of your homepage. Now, a new question that I stole from other states is this big open-ended one about tell us something your library did this year that you're proud of. And I know we've all had challenges because of the pandemic year, but I know that there were moments of wonderfulness and moments of success and moments of great impact in your communities. And we would love to hear those. We would love to be able to use those stories. And even if you want to send me some pictures, we'd love to use those in helping to tell the stories of Connecticut Public Libraries. So those may end up in our social media. Those may end up in a state library newsletter. They may get funneled up to our state or federal politicians. I don't know yet. It's new. We're trying to figure out what to do with it. But please give me something you're proud of, and please write it professionally to make yourself sound awesome, but write for publication so that it makes sense. That's, again, just a box, right? It's a big open-ended question. You can just type away in there, or if you would like, go ahead and send it to me on a separate Word document if you want to do that. But just tell us something you did that you're proud of. Now, two more questions that hopefully will be easy for you are whether your library lends computers for patrons to take home and whether you lend hotspots for patrons to take home. So in both cases, these are items leaving the library. And I ask because I've been getting these questions from our other partners and other state agencies. They want to know not just who's got computers, like, okay, every public library has public access computers, but they're also interested in accessibility to those computers as well as that digital inclusion component of laptops, computers, and hotspots to lend out. So those are yes, no, and don't know questions. Hopefully pretty easy. All right, self-directed activities. This is new in Connecticut, and it's a new set of questions in many states. We're not the only ones that ask about self-directed activities, but these are not IMLS questions at this point. So self-directed activities are very distinct from programs, which have a specific definition within the context of IMLS and the State Annual Report. But these self-directed activities are so many things that you libraries have been doing over the past year to keep people engaged. So these are, for example, take and make kits or grab and go kits or story walks, things like that that the library has put that attention into creating. So you have created the content, you have created probably instructions for how people should use it or some kind of promotion of that activity. And patrons are taking advantage of the activities on their own without the expectation of staff interaction. So this is a new concept that we're capturing in Connecticut, and I'm looking for the number of self-directed activities for each age range, and then the number of participants in those activities. And because this is new, it is included in a new tracking tool. So as I mentioned earlier, if you had attended the sort of companion webinar about counting programs and activities, this will sound familiar to you. If you have not heard this before, I encourage you to take a look at the LibGuide and take a look at the resources and see what's the difference between programs and activities and how we're counting those going forward. So here's an example of what the new self-directed activity questions will look like on the annual report. They're all grouped together, and at the top, you'll see it's really about the number of activities for the target audience age. And then as we go down, there's the number of participants in those activities. So that's how they're grouped. And I can show you right here, these are all Connecticut questions. This is a new column that I added so that you guys can tell which are Connecticut specific questions and which ones are needed for IMLS for the national survey. So this is what those self-directed activity questions will look like. Oh, and let me go back. These total number, this is going to be a formula so that you don't have to add them up. Likewise, this total, it'll just automatically populate in the form. Okay, this is the new slide that I added. I think I added this slide last week about Simply e-checkouts after I talked with Brad Bullis, my coworker, about Research It and RB Digital and Simply E and how all of that is working and whether or not I could actually pre-populate any of this data in the report form. And we determined I could get the RB Digital circulations for ebooks and e-audio of statewide content through December when that service ended. But in fact, the state library does not have access to the number of checkouts through Simply E. So I am relying on the libraries that do use Simply E and provide that access to patrons to go into the reports. And hopefully you have been doing this already each month, but look at the number of checkouts that your patrons are doing in Simply E with those statewide resources. So there is some link here for the instructions for how to get your stats. Brad can help you with that. I think also the DPLA staff are really interested in this. This is kind of a quirk of using Simply E, a tool that we at the state library, at the Connecticut State Library, don't control. Our partners are controlling it and driving some of the statistical data and how that is both captured and accessible. So this is a new question. There is one question. So I will be asking libraries that do use Simply E to go in and grab one total number of all checkouts, which includes all audiobooks and ebooks, and just give me that in one number. Hopefully that will work, and hopefully you do already have some practice with this, but please be in touch if you need more information about that. All right, new IMLS questions. They just added a couple of questions about the reporting method. So we have been reporting the number of sessions on public internet computers. You guys are great at that. You really capture the number of times those computers are being used, and you give me that. Likewise, about a third of public libraries have been sending me the number of Wi-Fi sessions. That's great. I'm hoping that number of libraries increases over time. But now IMLS is asking, all right, did you actually count throughout the entire year? So is this an annual count for the whole year? Or did you make an estimate based on a typical week or weeks? And in the case of wireless sessions, they're specifying that it's a typical week of hardware logging or network scanning, not that it's a typical week of you walking around the library to see who's on a cell phone or a laptop, because that's not really a count or a fair or accurate count of the use of your Wi-Fi. So IMLS does ask you in that case to take a look at the hardware log or network scanning. And I will confess to you right now, I have no idea what hardware logging or network scanning are, and I am going to ask that you check in with your IT people, whatever IT consultant you have, to see what kind of data you can get from the Wi-Fi hardware that you currently have on your network. So I encourage you to dig into those numbers and really find out how often your Wi-Fi is getting used, right? We know that it has been used. If we don't have the data, we can't show that that use is going up. We also can't see when the network is being used most frequently. So I really do encourage you to get some kind of Wi-Fi network tracking system so you can get a sense of the use of that. Okay, getting into programs, reminding everybody, programs according to IMLS are planned events, right? So it's planned, it's scheduled, there's a purpose to it, the content is developed, and they're introducing the group that is attending to library services or introducing them to information. So the group concept here and the attending concept are also key to the definition of programs. That again, it's not a one-on-one, right? You're really planning a program for traditionally more than one person. You might only get one person, but you have intended that program to be enjoyed by multiple people, by a group. That's a program. You will make sure, please, in your program counts that you are excluding activities that are delivered one-to-one, right? Because that's not a program, that's something else. That may be a reference transaction, it may be a volunteer opportunity, it may be tutoring, it may be something else altogether that is not a program, but it's something else maybe you can count on your library's own reports. Always make sure that you're counting the programs your library sponsors and co-sponsors, and that you are not including programs sponsored by other groups, right? So somebody might be using your library meeting room, perhaps as a Girl Scout recruiting event, but that's not necessarily a program that your library sponsored. You're just providing the space. You can count that as use of your meeting room in a different question on your annual report. So as you're tracking the use of your spaces, keep track of it. Is this an outside group or was this an actual library program? And as we have been in the past, if you're doing your programs as a series, make sure you're counting each one of those programs in the series. So if you're doing an 8-week story time, you've got 8 programs right there. Okay, IMLS introduced a lot of new program questions. We had been asking, I think, just one program question per age group, and now we are asking 4 or 5 questions per age group. So you'll have to pick a format, and you'll have to pick an age group, and you'll have to report either attendance or views or participation at the activities. So there's a lot going on, which is why there's a whole hour-long webinar on how to count programs and activities, which I encourage you to take a look at if you haven't. But there are these new program formats really delving into the impact of the programs and how you are reaching patrons. So the in-person programs have been kind of pulled apart. So now it's either on-site programs or off-site programs. And on-site is anywhere on your library premises. So anywhere in the building, in the foyer, on the parking lot, on the lawn. It could be on your roof. It could be on the deck. If it's on your library premises, on your property, that's an on-site program. So obviously, if it's not on your property, that's an off-site program. Even if it's next door, right? If it's in the park next door, that's the town's park. It's not your property, so that's going to be off-site. Lots of great off-site programs happening in normal years when there's not a pandemic. So I think we'll be able to see how that number grows over time. Likewise, the virtual programs have been broken out. So we're recording both we're tracking the live programs as well as tracking the pre-recorded programs. So these are concepts that we're familiar with. Synchronous is the live programs. Asynchronous is those pre-recorded or on-demand programs where you can just pop in anytime and watch them, in contrast to the live synchronous programs where you have to dial in at a specific time in order to see or hear that program. So those are the new program formats. And as we have in the past, you will count a program only once. So there can be instances where you offer an in-person program and you are also live streaming it. You may at some point later post a recording of that program, all totally kosher, but that's only one program. So you will always default to the in-person component first and then the live virtual component. So make sure you're counting each program only once. And as we have in the past, we will track the intended age of our audience. IMLS used to group all children together, ages 0 to 11, and they have just started to break them apart to two different groups. So now there's 0 to 5, the really young ones, kind of an early literacy, pre-literacy age, and the older kids 6 to 11. So those are new subdivisions, and going forward, you'll need to count your programs with those two different ages. Likewise, IMLS clarified that teen programs are for ages 12 to 18. That wasn't really explicit before. So those ages are now in the definitions. And likewise, they clarified that adult programs are for ages 19 and up. And then what IMLS calls general interest is sort of all the other great intergenerational or all ages programs that you might offer. And Chess Club is such a great example of that, where it doesn't matter what age you are, everybody can come and play and learn from each other. So say, for instance, you were doing a program for ages 18 and up. That's an adult program, right? It's really geared at adults. So make sure you're putting that in the adult programs, not in the teen programs. But you remember, it's the age of your program's primary intended audience. And remember, whenever we're doing story times, this is a program for children 0 to 5, ages 0 to 5. But in terms of attendance, you're counting everybody who's there, right? You're counting the kids and their caregivers as your attendance at that program, as we have in the past. Here's a little more information about attendance. For your in-person programs, whether they're on-site or off-site, you'll count them as you usually do, right? So whether that's heads or faces or butts in the seats, that's what you're going to count. And with your live virtual programs, you're going to be looking for terminology about the number of unique viewers or live viewers while they're watching the program. There is a new spreadsheet available that my fellow state data coordinators put together to help you track this live virtual attendance concept on various platforms. And it will also help you figure out how to get the number of views of recordings. So there is help out there, I think, on the next slide or two. For pre-recorded programs, you won't report attendance because people didn't actually attend, they just watched it. So you'll report views of pre-recorded programs. And here's more information about views. To clarify, this is the number of times somebody watches your recording or listens to your recording if it's a podcast. It's not the number of people who clicked like or +1 or thumbs up, right? It's not social media engagements. It's really the number of times your recording was played. So that's what you're going to be looking for. And now this next bullet point, the third bullet there, I put in bold in red. IMLS is now asking us to count the number of views after 7 days. So once you post your recording, say on a Monday, you're going to go back the next Monday and count the number of views of that recording after 7 days. And then you're going to stop paying attention to those views for that particular recording, right? So IMLS just wants to know the number of times that recording was played within 7 days, and that's what you'll count. Now, do not stress, all right? Don't go back and recount everything you did for the past 11 3/4 months, okay? Just as you're going forward, start counting for 7 days with programs. You could start today if you want, but make sure you're starting as of July 1st, that you're counting the views after 7 days. And if you were lucky enough to post that recording to different platforms, count all of those views and add them up, right? So maybe you had it on YouTube and Facebook. Just double count those views. All right, so this is a great slide in the on the recording. So when you find this on our website, we'll take a look at the website. I'll show you where to find all this. But the Google Sheets with instructions for how to get the number of views and the number of live attendance, there's a link for you. It's here in the slides if you want it. And here, the second bullet point I wanted to specifically have right there in writing, in letters that we can all see. You do not have to backtrack. If you've been counting the number of views as of the end of the month or end of the fiscal year, please go ahead and give me those numbers in this year's annual report. That is okay. Give me the numbers you have and we'll work with those, all right? Don't stress. It was a funky year. I don't want this thing to kill you. Give me the numbers you have, and then going forward, let's use these new definitions. So here's how programs will look in the annual report in terms of questions. So this is just a section on teen programs. And we start with the number of programs. So here's number of programs, number of pre-recorded programs, and then we get into attendance. So the attendance count and the views of recordings. So they're grouped, they're initially grouped by age here. And my thought was that the teen librarian could fill in some of these questions, the children's librarian could fill in some of the questions, the adult services librarian could fill in some, that you are probably capturing these by age range. And then we're going to look at them always in the same order. So for each age group, all the questions are in the same order. I do want to point out here, so this is that new column where I make a note of whether it's a Connecticut specific question, and we saw that before. So the abbreviation for Connecticut specific questions is CT. That one seemed pretty obvious to me. The abbreviation for IMLS or national questions is US, because I wanted a 2-letter one, and US seemed to imply national. So anything with a US is an IMLS question that I cannot change. Now, anything with an F is a feeder question. It sort of feeds into an IMLS national question. So in order to get this total number of synchronous young adult programs, I have to ask you all these little questions about the number of programs, right? And in order to get the total attendance, I got to ask you all these other little questions. And I know that that's a lot of new questions in one place at one time, which is why I developed that handy little spreadsheet for tracking and counting programs and activities. So again, putting in a plug, I hope you will use that spreadsheet to help you keep track of all this data. But that's what the questions will look like. Okay, so there is a tool for counting your programs. This is the link that you're going to get at 4 o'clock today. We will take a peek at that so that you can find all of this information. There's an Excel spreadsheet that you can download and just keep track of all your programs and activities right in there, and it will add up and keep the totals for you. Also with these slides, you can take a look. I posted the recordings online and the slides of this counting programs webinar. So if you thought, oh my gosh, I really want to go back and watch that webinar that I missed, there are 4 different recordings to choose from. Take your pick. The slides are the same for each one. Okay, some additional changes. This is what I just mentioned, but it's here on a slide, right? So US is national question, F is a subtotal that's feeding into a national question, and here's our Connecticut specific ones. So that's what they'll look like in the annual report form. We're going to take a peek over at that web page, but this is what you'll see when we get there. And I like to leave you with some reminders in general, just that in the survey form, it's a detailed Excel form, and it starts with a full page of instructions and definitions. Often people ask me questions that are answered in the form, in the instructions and definitions. So I do encourage you to actually read the information that's provided. It's going to help you. It will answer a lot of questions for you. And likewise, in the library tab, there's a tab for where all the questions are. There's a lot of pop-up boxes in the annual report form to give you more information and to bring those definitions out again. So they're right there in the form as you're answering that question. There's a lot of clarification in there for you. Also, I'm going to encourage everybody every time I talk about this to please don't wait until the last minute to start your report or to submit your data, because it's stressful for all of us. And as we have seen, sometimes pandemics happen and life shuts down completely. So the deadline of November 15 is a state mandated deadline that I can't change. So I will be expecting your report by 4 o'clock on November 15th. Please don't wait until the last minute. It's going to make all of us wicked stressed out. Okay, so there have not been many questions. I have been watching, and you've been suspiciously quiet while I keep talking, which makes me a little worried. So I'm going to let you type in some questions while we're here, but I want to hop out and go over to this little, this guy. Let's take a look at the annual report page here. So if you're ever stuck, if you're ever here on our LibGuides and you're like, oh my gosh, where is that stupid statistics page? You're gonna start up here with services, and you're gonna pull down to library statistics, and that's gonna get you to the statistics page right here. And these top tabs are the first layer of navigation, the statistical profile here with all of this great summary data about what everybody's been doing. But what we're talking about today is the annual report. So at some point in mid-July, the annual report form for fiscal year 2021 is going to come right here. This tab is going to change to 2021, and the form will be available right here. You can see last year's form if you want to look at it and see all the differences, but this year's form is going to be significantly different with many new questions. So right here, changes to the 2021 report. These are the recordings from the previous 2 sessions that I've done. I'm going to put our recording right here. So this afternoon or tomorrow morning, this register word is going to turn to recording, and that's where you'll be able to click and see this again. Here are the new slides that I uploaded at 1:53 this afternoon. So you'll want to grab those. And I did add a slide on the 18th about Simply e-checkouts. So I'm going to have to backtrack with everybody else who watched this session before the 18th, before today, to tell them about that new Simply E question. And then as we go down, here's some, if you want to click to hop down to those sections, you can do that. But here's a list of all of the new questions, right? So as we go down, clarifications, all the COVID-19 questions, you can see them in all of their extensive wordy glory. They are all there to take a look at. Let me go up. Here's this new Simply E question right here. I added on the 18th. And I want to draw your attention here to this word, these words, this handy guide. It's always called this handy guide because I don't have a better name for it. But this is what I mentioned that my fellow state data coordinators put together to help you find guidance on where to get the number of live attendees as well as the number of views. So let's say, for instance, as I did today, we're doing a Zoom, and I'm going to convert that recording and post it on YouTube. So first of all, I want to take a look at video conferencing tab to see in Zoom how I will count my live viewers. So here's the terminology that Zoom use for live attendance. And here's how I'll find my live attendance in Zoom. And then let me pop back here, and my recording is going to go on YouTube. So let's check the video sharing tab here. And YouTube will tell me how to get the number of people who watched my recording. So terminology and where to find that in YouTube. So this information is here. I do encourage you to take a look at it. Let me see what's in the chat here. Question. Something that has bothered me for years is the fact that these pages aren't really printable. These are frames. Only the data that fits on one page will print. If the information to be printed takes up more than one page, it gets cut off and will not print. I use Mozilla Firefox. Can your webmaster fix this? Talking about the LibGuides. That may be a LibGuides feature. I can look into that. I don't know what LibGuides as a tool offers. I will take a look and see what I can do. I don't know what their functionality is. All right. So as we go up, we looked at the 2021 report changes, and let's also take a look at programs. So if you are interested in programs and activities, right here is the Excel spreadsheet for where you can count your programs and activities. I encourage you to download that, use that. There are the presentation slides and all of the recordings. Tons of info down here about programs. So very good stuff. All right. Oh, so when you print the page, Celia, what happens there? Does that not work for you? Maybe you'll have to try that sometime. Just come on down here and try print page. Okay. That might be a printer setting. I'll have to try that here and see what I get. Yeah, I'll try it out. It may be a local setting on your end too, so take a look at that. Okay, so I have told you everything that I think I want to tell you. Not seeing any further questions in the chat. All right. Great. Okay, no questions. You're going to have questions. I know you're going to have questions. You're going to email me questions. Feel free. Feel free. But that's all I have to tell you today. I will be offering another webinar at several points over the summer. Just getting people oriented to the annual report. We're going to talk about how to actually enter data in the annual report. So that'll be a whole nother webinar. If you have suggestions or questions, please be in touch. But otherwise, I'm going to say thank you all for coming. I appreciate your time. Take a look at the recording. Please fill out the evaluation. And thank you all very much for being here. Take care. Bye-bye.